Let's head now to very near Ashburton, between the town and the Pacific coast, roughly an hour south of Christchurch. On Monday, we brought you the story of Five Star Beef, the country's only large-scale commercial feedlot, somewhere in the region of 14,000 cattle, with consent for up to 19,000 on an area of 800 metres by 400 metres. Animal rights group SAFE, along with Fish and Game and others, are calling for large feedlots to be banned. And on Tuesday, Environment Minister David Parker joined us on Checkpoint and expressed concern about the environmental impact of such large-scale feedlot farming. You, in great numbers, contacted us to say you don't like such farming, and Zach's story from Monday has been viewed more than 125,000 times since it first went to air on Checkpoint. But we hadn't heard from Ensco, the owners of Five Star. We asked to go to the farm. Silence. Today it became apparent why. MPI has issued a Mycoplasma bovis notice with 44 cattle brought onto the feedlot last month suspected of having the disease. Essentially, it's now in lockdown. More on that after 6. But this afternoon we spoke to Ensco CEO Peter Conley about his feedlot, the environment, the animals and the beef they produce.
We have a system which provides total care for our animals. Our animals have access to fresh water and food 24 hours a day. Every animal is checked on a daily basis, and we take great care of our animals. We care for the environment. We operate within the requirements of what we're allowed to do, and we produce a niche product. We don't administer growth promotants to animals, which most feedlots globally would do. We don't feed antibiotics to animals, which some people claim in terms of boosting productivity. The history of the feedlot, it's been operating for 27 years. When it was designed and built, the company did a lot of research around what was global best practice and looked right across New Zealand in terms of potential locations where we would have the best climate for animal welfare in the environment, and it's certainly a niche operation when it comes to the customers we service as well.
And the climate,
so
sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but you raised the climate. The climate's important because there is no shade, is there?
No, there's no shade. So when we built and designed the feedlot, and after that time we've done a lot of research around covered versus uncovered feedlots, and so far there's been nothing compelling one way or the other to say what's best. Cattle, obviously, they're an outdoor animal. These animals are the breeds that we have on the feedlot. They're suited to the environment that they're in.
Okay.
And the microclimate of the feedlot on the coast where it's located has excellent air quality. There's a breeze that comes in that keeps the air clear and keeps the cattle nice and cool, particularly in the summer.
Okay, let's talk about the model. So it's an unusual farm, and I think some people are just catching up with the way you work. You don't breed, do you? You buy stock that are about, 18 months old, roughly?
Yes, so our model is that, and look, we've been working, farmers that supply us with cattle, many of them have been supplying us with cattle for 27 years, alongside the farmers that supply us with crops. They've been farming crops for us for feed for the same period of time. So we take the cattle in. They can be anywhere between 15, 20 months of age, and they're then put into a ration that includes grain, and they're finished on that. And on average, they're there for about 120 days. But we call them grain finished, and that's how our customers understand the product as.
Do you think the customers understand? It's really interesting, the response to Zach Fleming's story that went to air on Checkpoint earlier in the week. A lot of people have expressed surprise and in some cases dismay that we are farming this intensively. There's no grass, there's no trees, there's no pasture, there's no hills. There's just 14,000 cows in a fairly large enclosure.
Yeah, well, it's not a single enclosure.
No.
But it's there's multiple enclosures within the feedlot. But I think you raise a good point, and totally respect people's views and and how they may see things. And let's be honest. In New Zealand, we are a farming-based nation, and a lot of people, understand farming in New Zealand, and so they have that image of a pasture-based system. This is a different way of farming cattle.
It's commerce, isn't it? It's about commerce.
It is about, ultimately,
this is a business.
This is a business, you're right. But to put some perspective around the consumer, and you've touched on the New Zealanders, this feedlot represents 10% of ANZCO's beef production. It represents 2% or less than 2% of New Zealand's beef production.
And isn't that? But and I know you're using that as a case of mitigation. But I could suggest the reverse, and that is that in fact, it's the 98% that we sell to the world. It's the grass, isn't it? It's the story of the grass. Yep. That when people think of farming in New Zealand, there is not a person in Europe, there is not a person in the United States, there is not a person in Asia who imagines 14,000 cattle together in a feedlot with no shade, like your facility.
I think some of those markets you're talking about, they do understand that. I think what we're talking
They understand it where they are. They understand it in the United States. I'm just saying that isn't our point of difference grass?
Yes, I think our big point of difference is grass, and that's why 90% of the beef that we produce is grass-fed, and 100% of the lambs that we produce is finished the same way. But there is a customer out there, and 95% of the production that comes off this five-star beef feedlot is exported. And actually, when we've taken the product to market in New Zealand, and when we've given that to New Zealand consumers, they've actually enjoyed it.
Can we? There's no polite way of talking about this. Can we talk about what happens to the shit? What's the word? Let's fix on a polite word. Shall we use effluent? What happens to the effluent?
The effluent in the feedlot is all contained within the feedlot. So I mentioned earlier the feedlot's built to best practice. We operate, obviously, to resource consents.
Can I look at the resource consent? So the most meaningful consent, I think, is 30686. And if I look at point 3 of that, the volume of feedlot effluent discharged onto land shall not exceed 3,300 cubic metres per day. That's 3.3 million litres of effluent a day you are consented to discharge onto land.
Yeah, and I can't answer what we actually do because I don't have those figures in front of me, but I can find out.
But that's a hell of a lot, isn't it? That's a hell of a lot that your consent allows for.
Yeah, John, the bulk of the waste from the feedlot is actually used as fertiliser back into crop farming to produce feed. So that's where the bulk of it goes.
And in order for that to happen, it goes into a kind of treatment pond at the eastern side of the farm?
Yeah, we capture liquids and solids through that. We also capture waste out of the pens as well and collect that and store that.
And once again, that is the subject, of course, of consent. In this case, the consent is 100,899. Now, that consent allows for a leakage rate of up to 2 litres per second, which is 7,200 litres per hour, which is 172,000 litres of leakage a day before anything is even done. And when something is done, you have a year to do it. That's a hell of a high leakage rate, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't comment. I don't have the exact details of all the consents in front of me, John, so I just simply can't answer those questions.
What I guess I'm saying is, if I look at your page, if I look at your website, and you've got 5-star beef feedlot key information, you've got almost 2 pages on animal welfare. Then you've got 2 lines on environmental, just 2 lines. 5-star beef does not discharge waste into water. No one's suggesting you do, although you're discharging it onto land very near water. And you say the second line is you dispose of effluent in line with consents. And so you're falling back on consents. I look at the consents and I think, man, no one would describe these consents as onerous. I mean, these are low bar consents you're dealing with. They date back to 2005 and 2010. It's a different time entirely, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you're quoting the consents. I can't comment in terms of how we're actually performing against them because I simply don't have that information in front of me.
I just wonder, I can absolutely see the commerce in this, and also I know the global market for grain-fed beef, and there are lots of places in the world where people like to eat grain-fed beef. I just wonder if you are out of sync with where New Zealand is heading now. I mean, if we go back to your consents, and I think the consents are important because these are, you know, the parameters within which you have to conduct your business. If we look at the really important, the major consent from 2005, your nitrogen rate, the total nitrogen loading rate on your soil should not exceed 455 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. Now, we've spent the day looking. I can't find consents for anything higher than 150 kilos per year on pasture farms. That's in Waikato. You've got 3 times the nitrogen consent rate. You know, your farming is out of sync with where we're heading, isn't it?
Yeah, well, look, John, I need to obviously look at the consent so that I can answer the questions, and happy to come back and have that conversation. At the moment, I just don't have the numbers in front of me.
Is it time for Brand New Zealand to be clear about what that means in terms of farming? Or do you think that we have to be pragmatic and get with the game and understand that there are lots of countries in the world who do farm like this, and this is just the way farming is going to head?
I don't believe this is the way farming's going to head in New Zealand. And very, very much we're supportive of developing a pasture-fed beef program. This is something that we've invested in. We have a customer that wants the product. We're fully, our interest is in having healthy animals in the feedlot, and we market a niche product. We're a high-cost operation, a high-investment operation, and New Zealand cattle's not cheap. New Zealand feed isn't cheap, so we've carved a niche market out for the product we produce off the 5-star beef feedlot.
As part of your consents, you're required to provide ECAN with a kind of environmental stock take, aren't you? A kind of environmental impact report every March. Why can't we see that?
Again, I don't have that in front of me. I don't know if you've asked for it, so...
Yeah, we have. We have.
Okay, well, I'll have a look at it. I just have to have a look at it and see what it is. In terms of our consents, my understanding is, we have a dedicated resource managing our obligations under our consents. I haven't seen our latest report. Obviously, regional councils measure compliance over a range of areas.
Absolutely.
And I believe that we operate within the requirements of our consents.
But you haven't seen your latest report, though, right?
No, I haven't seen our latest one.
Okay, which is what, from March?
Yeah. The only thing I am aware of is we're required to conduct water tests. I think we're required to conduct 4 water tests over a period, and we've in one instance we've only taken 3 water tests. But other than that, I'm not aware of any other issue.
The restaurants that are serving wakanui beef, grain-fed beef in New Zealand, do they come and visit? Do people pop in? I guess people understand the beef and the very particular quality and flavour of the beef. Yeah. Do they understand the facility it's coming from, do you think?
Yes, they do. We have, both internationally, we've had a lot of visitors to 5-star beef, and we've also had New Zealand people involved in the New Zealand supply chain there too. So I can't speak for individual restaurants, but certainly people in the supply chain in New Zealand certainly understand how we operate.
You had stockists on your website that they seem to have gone. Why is that?
In terms of wakanui?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, some were asked to be taken down because they were probably getting attention that they didn't want. So that's the main reason.
Peter Conley, who is the CEO of Ensco